I just signed into law the national security package that was passed by the House of Representatives this weekend and by the Senate yesterday.
With a TikTok ban set to take effect Sunday, the justices have just handed down their decision.
It's going to make America safer. It's going to make the world safer.
I do believe that banning a social media app like TikTok is a violation of the First Amendment.
A decision that affects some 170 million Americans.
This is not an attempt to ban TikTok. It's an attempt to make TikTok better. Tic-tac-toe. A winner.
So the court has upheld the ban, so TikTok will not be allowed in the United States.
We are just now reporting that the Biden administration does plan to punt implementation to the Trump administration.
On behalf of everyone at TikTok and all our users across the country, I want to thank President Trump for his commitment to work with us to find a solution that keeps TikTok available in the United States.
TikTok is back.
There's breaking news from the White House tonight. President Biden has pardoned his son, Hunter Biden.
Something for months the president insisted he would not do.
The blowback is certainly coming from all directions for President Biden, and it isn't just Republicans that are crying hypocrisy. Legal scholars call it uncharted territory. All of his living siblings and their spouses, including James Biden, Sarah Biden, Valerie Owens Biden, his sister, her husband, John T. Owens,
Anthony Fauci, General Mark Milley, and the members and staff who served on the House committee that investigated the January 6th attack on the Capitol, including Liz Cheney.
The votes for President of the United States are as follows. Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida has received 312 votes.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
The first item that President Trump is signing is the rescission of 78 Biden-era executive actions, executive orders, presidential memoranda, and others.
Trump declared a national emergency at the country's southern border.
All illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came.
Other executive orders Trump signed include declaring cartels as foreign terrorists and an order to end birthright citizenship. The administration also wants to end the practice of catch and release, reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy, and send federal troops to border states.
The golden age of America begins right now. My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth.
Hello and welcome to Next Gen New Mexico. From Albuquerque, I'm your host, Joshua Neal, and today I am joined by my good friend, James Nolan. James and I are both political moderates. We stand on opposite sides of the aisle. James leans a little left, and I lean a little right. But we both believe that it's time to have more conversations across the aisle. In this episode, we're tackling three big topics: the TikTok ban, presidential pardons, and immigration. Let's dive in. James, thanks so much for joining me today.
Sure thing, Josh. Thank you for having me on. I'm really looking forward to discussing these issues with you today. So, look forward to it.
So, can you believe that all of those things that we just heard in the intro montage happened within the last week?
It's so much.
It's a lot.
It's moved really, really quickly. And of course, it makes sense because we just had an election, and this is when all the executive's orders, the initial things are coming down, which are setting the first starting tone for the new presidency.
Do you remember it being this quick paced during the Biden administration 4 years ago? It seems like there's a whole new dynamic here.
Yeah, I don't really remember this many things that felt so extreme when Biden took office.
Yeah. Well, I guess as we kind of highlighted in the montage, there was a lot of stuff going on right before the inauguration. There was a bunch of stuff happening right after the inauguration. So it was just a really busy week in the news cycle. But one of the things that was really heavy in the news cycle was TikTok and everything that was going on with the TikTok ban. I don't know. Do you use TikTok? Do you have a TikTok account?
I do not. Sometimes I use the YouTube version, but I'm thankful that I don't use it more because I consider it to be brain rot on the whole. Yeah. So I don't really want to be addicted to it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I don't know if you recall, last year there was a national security bill that Biden signed into law, and part of that bill was a ban on TikTok, unless they could sell to an American company. And it took a long time for any kind of progress or anything to happen around that, and it seemed like all the way until the very last second, it looked like TikTok was going to be banned. And the Supreme Court even reviewed the case to see if there was any kind of anything about the bill that had been passed and signed into law was unconstitutional. Sunday, they decided that it was not unconstitutional, that there was nothing about the bill that violated the Constitution or the First Amendment of Americans to practice free speech. And so on late Saturday evening, it seemed like TikTok was no longer in operation here in the United States. So I have a TikTok account, and I found this whole situation really interesting. I took a screenshot of these messages that you could see on TikTok before and after this ban on Saturday night. And so on Saturday night, I tried to log on to TikTok, and it gave me this message that said, "Sorry, TikTok is not available right now. A law banning TikTok in the United States has been enacted, and unfortunately that means that you cannot use TikTok for now." Then they said, "We are fortunate that President Trump has indicated that he will work with us on a solution to reinstate TikTok once he takes office. Please stay tuned." So that I found super interesting because they specifically called out Trump as possibly the hero of the situation, that he was going to act in some way that was going to bring the platform back to 170 million Americans.
Yeah, and Josh, so I know a couple of things, but maybe just like recap for us, what are some of the big reasons why the TikTok ban is in place? Like, what was the impetus behind that? What's the fear? What's the perceived threat that has instituted this huge ban on something that so many millions of Americans use and love?
Yeah, well, I think that one of the big concerns was that China had access to data that could have been mined from devices that Americans were using.
Mm-hmm.
And what that data included is not really clear, and there's also never been an actual inquiry into those claims.
Mm-hmm.
There's never been a court case where they actually investigated what data is being mined and what that data may be being used for. Last year, when all of this debacle first began, TikTok jumped through a bunch of loopholes to bring the data to American shores. And so a third party called Oracle actually was contracted with TikTok to store the data here in the United States. So theoretically, the data is still here in the United States and quote unquote never goes to China.
Unless it gets hacked, as almost everyone does.
Right. But the question is, since China is an owner of the app, do they still have access to the data? I think that was a big question. During the Supreme Court hearings, several of the justices were asking, what is the concern here? Is the concern that people don't know that China has access to their data? Because at this point, as the justices said, everybody knows that China has their hands in TikTok. So it's no secret anymore that China may have access to the data. Is the concern that China may be using that data to manipulate Americans? Is the concern that the data may be reinforcing some kind of ideal? I don't know. There's a whole bunch of questions that weren't quite answered, but I think that it was more fears of what China could do versus what China is doing that encouraged and persuaded a lot of lawmakers to vote yes on this ban on TikTok.
I mean, certainly I can see the concern behind that in terms of these algorithms guide us into content and we don't understand the reasons that go into what videos that we're getting shown. Are we getting shown a video that is complaining about the government, or are we getting shown videos that make the government look like it's doing a really good job and things are getting better? These algorithms are opaque to our understanding, and we don't understand who or what may be behind the reasons why we're seeing the things that we're seeing, how it's shaping our opinions. So I could certainly understand the concern that a foreign government could shape mass public opinion in the United States in a way that could influence things that may be contrary to U.S. interests. So sure, I can imagine that.
You could make that same argument for any other platform that Americans use. Facebook, Meta, YouTube, Twitter. You don't understand the algorithm behind those apps either. You don't know how the content that you're seeing is procured for you. We're not privy to that information of how the algorithm actually works. So,
and we might not be able to understand it, actually, even if we were privy to it.
True, yeah. So what I found so interesting was that it really seemed like a certain level of propaganda and maybe manipulation of President Trump into getting him to, like almost coercing him into helping free TikTok and to bring TikTok back. And so before the ban, there was that message that I read earlier where they said, we are fortunate that President Trump has indicated that he will work with us on a solution. And then the next day, when they brought TikTok back on, there was another message that said, welcome back. Thanks for your patience and support. As a result of President Trump's efforts, TikTok is back in the US. You can continue to create, share, and discover all the things you love on TikTok. Click here to continue. So, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm reading between the lines here a little bit, but it just freaked me out just a little bit how they were calling out President Trump so blatantly. But what do you think about that?
I'm not really sure what to think about that. I mean, I'm not sure that any of the concerns about it have been resolved. So I'm not really sure what President Trump did exactly to bring it back, or did he do anything? Is that message from TikTok even really truthful?
I think one of the many, many, many executive orders that he signed was to extend the deadline of when TikTok would be banned. And I think there was some questions of whether he could just do that by executive order. I mean, because this was a law that was passed by both chambers of Congress and signed by a former president. Can a current president change the terms of a previous law? I think that was still a question that's still out in the ether, and the Supreme Court may rule on that. But I think he was trying to push the deadline of when TikTok would be officially banned in the United States to give it more time to be sold or figure out what they were going to do. Here's what I think is going to happen. And this is maybe a little more conspiratorial, but I think that TikTok is preparing to be sold. But TikTok does not want to release the algorithm that they are using for their app to a different party that could be one of their competitors in the future. So during that short period where they took TikTok offline, I think there was an incredible amount of messaging that TikTok was doing to the public in the United States. Look how awful this bill is. Look how awful this is. But in the background, I think they were manipulating the algorithm that's used for the United States. And then they brought it back online. And now they're prepared to sell with a different algorithm to an American company.
Now, do you have any evidence to back that up, or is that just a conspiracy?
This is just me reading between the lines, trying to make sense of...
I mean, that's possible. I mean, it's logically possible, and that would make sense. But whether they did that, I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I have no idea. I also just found it so interesting that the CEO of TikTok was present at President Trump's inauguration, and that he made this video himself after TikTok was brought back online that said, everyone here at TikTok, we just want to thank President Trump for all of his efforts to bring TikTok back online. We want to call him out and say thank you. You know, I don't know. If they did that about Biden, I feel like so many Republicans would be concerned about it. But what in the world is going on here?
I mean, are they just like, is this just trying to stroke Trump's ego to make him more likely to do nice things for them in the future?
Maybe. Whether that's going to work or not, I don't know. I think that's the play they're trying to make.
I mean, I think that does scare me that a U.S. president could be just flattered into helping this or that person do this or that. But I mean, maybe that's just politics as usual.
Yeah. I
mean, going forward, though, are we going to have, two softwares of the world? There's one that's approved by the U.S. and there's another that's not. Will we accept any Chinese softwares for use in the public in the United States, or will the same logic apply to any other softwares or apps that might be Chinese in the future?
Right. Or really any other publication. I mean, if in the future, one of our future presidents determines that the UK or Germany is now one of our adversaries of the United States, are we no longer going to allow platforms like the BBC to publish in the United States? Or I think Breitbart is a German publication. Are we not going to allow them to publish in the United States? There's all kinds of questions that I think these recent decisions have made that set an interesting precedent for how we're going to govern what kind of information the United States gets.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, and I get the First Amendment concern as well, because if people are using TikTok to express their First Amendment right to free speech, and we're taking TikTok out of commission, I understand how that could be a First Amendment concern. However, I mean, is that speech that is ultimately being controlled by a foreign government, though?
Right.
And so I think I can see both sides there.
Yeah. But I think the question is it? I mean, really, there's no evidence that it is or that it's not. I think the fear is that it could be. It's like teetering on a fine line of how much influence are we going to allow our government to determine what we can and cannot see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if our government doesn't influence it, then will the Chinese government influence it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I like the latter option less.
Right.
So, yeah. I mean, I think you're totally right that Meta, Facebook, those algorithms are things that we also don't understand, owned by U.S. companies. But I mean, I suppose the thought is that the government of China cannot just tell Facebook what to do with, no questions asked. They can't order them like that, which they could TikTok. So yeah, I get the concern. I mean, like I said, I personally don't have anything good to say about TikTok. I think it makes our attention spans lower and lower so that we can't, understand complex thought anymore, which is already a wider trend in our society. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
I think that this election in specific was really interesting because this is kind of the first election where we had where our national candidates spent more time on social media than they did on traditional television. Especially President Trump spent an enormous amount of money and energy into trying to reach younger voters through TikTok and other social media platforms.
Or Joe Rogan, yeah. Which Kamala Harris did not do. And some people think that may have been a factor why she wasn't able to connect as effectively.
So I think that there's a tremendous benefit to social media and to things like TikTok. It definitely sheds light on areas of politics and other areas of life that we never would have seen before if we didn't have social media, which you could argue good and bad about that. But I don't know. I think it's really interesting that it could be a very useful and powerful tool if it's used correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it democratizes information in that our information streams are no longer controlled by three main news corporations, which it comes with a set of pros, but also a set of cons because it's harder. Sometimes it's maybe even harder to tell what's real anymore.
Yeah. True. Yeah, very true. One of the other things I wanted to talk about today is President Biden's pardon of his family members, of his son, Hunter Biden, which he had said for a long time that he would not do, and of other very prominent figures in politics over the last few years, like Anthony Fauci and Liz Cheney, prominent figures who have supported President Biden. And he pardoned them, he claims, because he feared that there would be some kind of retribution against them for coming after Donald Trump the last few years, or that Donald Trump would try to attack them in order to get back at Biden and Kamala Harris.
Didn't Trump promise to do that in some cases, right? Like to go after the people who went after him in the Justice Department?
Well, he certainly made claims like that in 2016 when he was running against Hillary Clinton. He said he was going to put her in jail.
Yeah, right? Lock her up, I remember.
A very famous line in one of the debates was that she said, it's going to be a horrible day when you become president. And he said, yeah, because you'd be in jail, right? So that's not a unique or uncommon line for him to say. But I think a lot of people were really ridiculing Biden because they were saying, why would he need to pardon his family members and these other people if there was really nothing of substance to come after them for?
Well, I mean, it might depend on what you think of Donald Trump. I mean, the things that he says are very concerning. Like if you take them at face value, you're like, wow, is our politics really come down to the current leader uses the government and uses the law to come after his political opponents? I mean, if that threat is to be taken seriously, then I can certainly understand why Biden would do that.
Yeah. Well, that was certainly that Trump was accusing Biden of doing in the previous election.
Yes, he did.
He accused Biden and his administration of weaponizing the Justice Department and coming after him. So
is the solution to continue the same exact... That's the thing that I really... That's one of the things that I hate about the way that Trump approaches that, or at least the things he says, is Biden is doing this thing to me and it's wrong, so therefore I'm going to do the same exact thing in reverse. I mean, it's like... Well,
that's just politics in a nutshell. The left and the right are both doing that. I don't know. after hearing about the pardons this last week, it really made me start thinking that we probably need some kind of limits on what kind of pardons the president can offer.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem right that he can just, with a stroke of a pen, say, oh, all of my family members are completely absolved of anything and everything that they may or may not have done that the public is not yet aware of. It just doesn't seem right. I mean, President Biden did that for his family. If Trump did that for his family, there's precedent for that.
Yeah, is this going to become a normal thing where every single presidency, they pardon everyone who's, their friends, family, relatives, second cousins, roommate, I think that seems, if that becomes more normal, it seems like in a certain way that could kind of make a mockery of the law.
Right.
Because the law isn't supposed to be limited depending on who's rich and powerful and who's not. Everybody's supposed to be equal. I think that's concerning. It's a concerning trend.
Yeah.
Whether you're on the left or the right, I think.
And what's the point of having a court system that brings people to justice if the president can just turn around and say, nah, never mind. They may have done some very questionable things, but they're one of my allies. So I'm going to, with the stroke of a pen, just absolve all of those accusations.
Yeah, it seems very corrupt indeed.
Mm-hmm. So I guess following that trajectory, after President Trump became president, following suit with a lot of previous presidents when they came into office, he had a tremendous amount of executive orders that he wanted to sign in order to get the ball rolling, so to speak. And a lot of them had to do with national security. We already talked about the executive order about TikTok. But one that's been in the news recently, kind of at the headlines, is his indication that he would change the terms of birthright citizenship. I don't know if you heard anything about that. So I guess
I have heard about this, yeah.
His indication is that the interpretation of the law, the interpretation of the 14th Amendment, has been wrong all of this time. And now he's interpreting that the United States government can take a more proactive approach in determining who can and cannot become citizens based on their parents' illegal status or temporary status here in the United States.
Well, if there's one thing we know about Trump, it's how astute he is at interpreting constitutional law.
Well, I think that Trump is like a hammer in search of a nail. Sometimes he banging around all over the place, and every once in a while he finds a nail that he can hit, and he hits it hard. And so a lot of the executive orders, and what you have to remember about executive orders is that they are not laws. It's more like an opinion or a wish that he would like to see happen. A lot of them will immediately be struck down by the courts because they have no substance or basis. A lot of them are just rescinding things that President Biden had done in his previous administration, and Trump can do that because there is no substance or foundation to it. It is just a wish or an indication of this is the way that I would like to see things happen. And those can easily be struck with a pen. And so having that context in mind, I think it should reassure a lot of people that this really is just a wish list item. This is not really anything that can be enforced with full capacity without the consent of Congress or the courts. So trusting in the system hopefully will absolve some of these concerns. But yeah, it is really interesting that a president could take this level of executive action to try and reinterpret the Constitution apart from the courts.
Yeah. And do you agree with his executive order or not? What say you?
I think I understand the concern that there could be people taking advantage of the 14th Amendment in order to ensure that their children have American rights. For example, people who put themselves in perilous situations to cross the U.S. border so that their children can be born here. Obviously, we don't want people putting themselves in bad situations. That way their children can have American rights, right? And that's also just a loophole in the American system that supersedes all of these people who have been waiting their turn to come to the United States legally. It just doesn't seem right. But there's nothing illegal about being born in the United States and having American citizenship. And so I think that there could be some legislation that comes through Congress that maybe further defines if you were here illegally or if you're here on temporary status, there should be terms and conditions to your child's citizenship and whether they qualify or not. But that's something that should come through Congress, be vetted by the Supreme Court, and signed into law by the president through the traditional process. Unilaterally, through executive order, reinterpreting the Constitution, I think sets all kinds of precedents that have never been in the United States before. Traditionally, we believe that the Supreme Court is the one who interprets the Constitution, helps us to understand the trajectory of how we should interpret the law. Congress is the one who writes the new laws to help solidify and redefine what we understand in the Constitution, and the president is only there to enforce the law.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that anything that seems to threaten the balance of powers, I'm definitely against. I mean, I think the executive branch needs to stay in its own lane, as it were.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, well, there's several big things going on with this. So one thing is securing the border, right? And sending the military to the border, if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
Another thing is deporting people who are already in the United States, who are not here legally.
Right.
And then the third thing is what we've been talking about is the birthright citizenship thing. So what's your opinion on the moves on, one, securing the border, and two, deporting the huge number of people who are in the United States without a current legal status?
Yeah. I'm definitely pro-strong borders. I have nothing against securing our border and making sure that we know who is and who is not coming into our country. I think it's totally possible to be pro-national security, pro-strong borders, and also be pro-immigration. I don't think that those two concepts are mutually exclusive. We can very much be pro-immigration and also have a strong border and not let terrorists or people who we don't want to come into the country. I also think that it's unfair to the people around the world who are in places like South Asia, Africa, Eastern Europe, who really want to come to the United States, who don't have the luxury of just walking across the border. They have to go through the legal process and apply, be flown out to the U.S., and come in the legal way.
Or they have to travel treacherously through Central America or Mexico, like millions of people do, and not all of them make it, you know, to cross the border. So.
Yeah. So I'm totally in favor of legal immigration. I'm totally in favor of strong borders. And I think that we need to set a precedent that, look, we're not going to tolerate, what has been happening these previous years, where we just let multitudes of people across the border without any indication of how many or who is actually coming into the country.
I definitely agree with that. And I think, clearly our border has been, and our immigration process has been broken in certain ways for a long time. So I think that if these moves are steps toward creating a coherent and effective and fair law of immigration, especially through the southern border, I definitely support that. But regarding the deportation of people who are already here, I think I do have issues with that. And I think I have really deep concerns about the implementation of that and the rationale behind that. Yeah.
What would you do differently?
Well, I think, I'm going to be... maybe I won't be the most helpful here because I'm not exactly sure what the solution is. I just have a couple of criticisms of the current direction of it.
Yeah.
So one thing is, I guess I have questions about what is to be gained from deporting this huge number of people, if it is a gain, actually, because I think that one big issue I have is the way that President Trump criticizes and he characterizes people who are not here legally as they're criminals, they're rapists, they're these evil, horrible people who all need to be, sent somewhere far away, when that is just not true for the vast majority of people who are here illegally. They're here because they want to find a better life. They want to find good jobs. They found a way, and now they're here. They've been responsible members of society, and many of them are trying as hard as they can to rise up through education, through higher education, to become successful members of American society. And that's one of the greatest strengths of America, is that we attract the best and brightest and the hardest working and the most motivated people from all over the world. And not all of them have come here legally. Our unemployment rate is low and has been low for years, right? How are we going to make up for a 15 million people labor shortage? What's the rationale behind that? And how does the benefit to be gained from that justify the huge amount of human suffering? You're uprooting these people from the lives that they've built for themselves. Many people were brought to the U.S. as children. They're American in every single way except for the town that they were born in.
Yeah.
And now we're uprooting their lives. The amount of human suffering involved in deporting all of those people is gigantic. And what is the benefit to, are we doing all of that just so that we could have a catastrophic labor shortage in the United States, which will hurt our economy?
I definitely think that there are people here who are doing harm to the United States. There's evidence that MS-13 has infiltrated not just Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the other border states, but that they're up in New York, they're up in Boston, and there's been a huge number of arrests, even in recent days, of people who have been gang affiliated who are wreaking havoc in those areas. So I think that there is a tremendous amount of gang violence. I read a book recently called Teen Violence in America, and it was actually written by a professor of Western New Mexico University, and he talked about how a lot of, especially unaccompanied minors who come across the border, that they're picked up by gangs because they find no other safety net when they come to the United States. The only group that they can find that speaks their language, that shares their culture, and that offers them some kind of stability and sense of community are the gangs. And that's why we're seeing an uptick in teen violence and young adult violence. So I definitely think that there is a huge concern, not just with national security, but with crime, with human trafficking, drug trafficking, that we definitely need to get under control. But I hear your point that, for all of those other people who have never done anything to harm another person, it seems like we should have some path for them to find some way to stay here in the United States and continue working. I would support some kind of self-identification or self-registration where they can say, hi, my name is so-and-so, I moved here at this day, I live at this address, I've never broken the law, I have this job with this employer, and they document who they are and where they've been so the U.S. knows who's actually here and give them some kind of legal status to stay here. I would totally support that if they'd be willing to self-identify and let the government know who they are, where they are, and what they're doing.
Well, I can't imagine that anyone would be very excited to do that, knowing that they would be drawing attention to themselves and they might be deported. If not by this administration, then maybe by a current administration. It would probably feel safer for them to remain anonymous. I think everything you said about the gangs, about crime, I mean, I'm not saying that everyone who's come illegally is, Mr. Rogers who's doing great work for the neighborhood. But yeah. I think what you said sounds like one possible plan that is far better than deporting every single illegal immigrant indiscriminately.
Yeah.
Why don't we start with a simple rule like, if you've committed a felony, then you're here illegally, then you get deported. Can we at least give priority to those people rather than, the husband and wife who raised 8 kids and who have been really hard workers who've contributed to the community for 40 years? Can we leave them alone and go after people who are actually doing violent crimes?
Yeah. Totally agree. And I think that this has not been a recent issue. This has been a topic of debate for the last 40 years. We've been talking about securing the border, redefining our immigration system, helping to make it more productive so we understand who's there, shortening the time that it takes to apply for asylum, for legal status. This has been a topic of debate for so long, and I think this is the culmination of that conversation, because there's been such a lack of initiative by Congress to actually make something happen. Now we have an executive who's willing to take drastic measures. And I think, honestly, if we want to see real change, Congress has just got to do their job. Congress has to pass substantive legislation that helps to define what the United States policy will be concerning immigration.
Yeah. I definitely take your point there. I mean, if one branch of government has failed to do even, moderate improvements for the last 20 yees, I think it makes sense that another branch will try to step in and fix what the people want to get fixed. I think I really am not super happy about the way that it's shaping up right now.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining me today, James. If you like what you hear, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.